I just think that it's like not necessarily a happy journey, but I think it is wow, the voice crack. Uh,
This is Eli, a Filipino American trans man and one of my best friends. We met in a Queens High School Spanish class, but now he lives in Texas, where he's getting his graduate degree in engineering. I sat down with him in early October and again in late November to hear his insight on the trans community, his own trans experiences, and how they intersect with other aspects of his identity. A major intersection in Eli's identity is his transness and his status as the son of Filipino immigrants. Eli's family has not been accepting of his trans identity. Since he started on T, or testosterone, after moving to Texas, he's had to artificially raise the pitch of his voice when calling his family so they don't catch wise that something has changed. This is also why his voice might sound different in different clips. They also don't know that he has legally changed his name to Elias, and still call him by his dead name.
they don't have to like outright or explicitly be transphobic to be transphobic, you know? Like we just don't talk about it, and that enough is like kind of like hurtful, you know?
Mhm. This reticence on Eli's transness comes in contrast to his family's openness on other aspects of his and his family's identity, such as immigration status. Eli described his family as openly discussing his parents' citizenship status, namely, his father at one point overstaying a visa. This openness is consistent with the findings of a 2014 ethnographic study on a migrant family in Pennsylvania, in which the parents chat with their children on a walk home from school about a legal document, La Carta, that would allow the children to have a citizen who signs it to stay with should the parents be deported. Eli's family's openness when it comes to immigration status makes their silence on Eli's identity as a trans man all the louder. Having a family that is indifferent or outright hostile to one's gender identity has been associated with encountering more transphobic treatment. According to a 2022 study, transgender and gender diverse Asian Americans are more likely to experience verbal harassment if their families are neutral to or unsupportive of their gender identities than if their families are supportive. As Eli described, he has felt the hurt of his family's indifference to his identity. I asked Eli where he thinks their attitude might come from.
I guess in their eyes, I'm kind of making my life harder for no reason. Like they moved to America and it's like a thing of wanting to be Americanized and
Hmm.
like fit in America. Because I do
Yeah.
feel like that's a big thing with immigrant families. I think that's a big thing with the Philippines, like Filipinos especially.
In other words, he thinks that in being trans, he has, in his family's eyes, made it harder for him to assimilate. And his family's desire for him to fit in comes from
Kind of like that pressure of like, well, your parents or like your family or whatever literally left their lives so that you could have this life.
a life of opportunities that his family sacrificed so much to provide for their children. A life that Eli is throwing away by quote unquote choosing to be trans. However, this judgment from his family has not made Eli any less secure in his gender identity.
I don't really feel like my trans identity ties into like my worth as a person,
Right.
obviously,
Of
because it's
course.
kind of arbitrary. And I feel more that like I feel more pressure about my worth as a person in regards to being like first gen.
Being the son of immigrants and feeling the pressure to be financially and socially successful as a way of fully appreciating the opportunities his parents have given him. This security in his identity comes in part from the environment where he grew up. Eli was born and raised in Queens, a short walk from my home in an adjacent neighborhood. Living in New York City, he found that most people didn't pay him much mind as far as his transness was concerned.
I feel like in college, it didn't necessarily like become that big of a deal on how like people treated me. I mean, maybe that's because we live in New York and no one really cares. And also my school had gender neutral bathrooms, and that was really nice. And I
Oh,
miss that because I'm so scared to go to the bathroom
oh
here.
man.
I don't know if that's because of this school or if it's because I'm in Texas. I'm sure it's both.
As Eli describes, moving to Texas for graduate school has put his experience living in New York into perspective. He can no longer take something as mundane as going to the bathroom for granted, because now he's in an environment where stepping into the men's bathroom as a trans man could be dangerous, whereas in college in New York, there were gender neutral bathrooms that alleviated this concern. Moreover, the simple presence of gender neutral bathrooms is an assertion by the college that people outside of the gender norm exist and deserve a place where they can do their business comfortably. This appreciation of people not caring extends to closer relationships, such as with his partner Miro and our friend group dubbed the Egg Cult.
I mean, Miro will find this cheesy, but I do think that like the GSA and like the cult and Miro were like a pretty big step in coming to terms with this identity because it was kind of like a thing of like, well, you guys don't give a fuck. And you guys don't really care, you
Mhm.
know? And you guys are like living your best lives. You know, Milk is a trans icon.
Oh, for sure. In seeing folks in the Gender Sexuality Alliance Club in our high school, and in our friend group be so chill, so to speak, about being trans, Eli felt free to explore his own identity in a safe space. Seeing our non binary friend Milk live their truth helped Eli live his, just like seeing Eli live his truth helped me live mine as an agender non binary person. There's an interesting dichotomy that presents here. Both Eli's family and friends could be described as indifferent to his gender identity, but the former has a negative impact, where the latter is positive. The distinction I see here is that Eli's family doesn't recognize or respect his identity. They don't discuss it and pretend there's nothing out of the ordinary. His friend group, on the other hand, does talk about being trans and does respect his identity, and show that there's nothing out of the ordinary in being trans. His family finds his transness odd, but doesn't say anything, while his friends show him simply by being themselves that transness is nothing to be ashamed of. Now would be a good time to talk about my own identities in relationship with Eli and the egg cult. I am an agender Ashkenazi Jew, who is white in any way that seems to matter. Agender is a term for people who, as opposed to simply having a gender that falls outside of the binary, don't experience having a gender at all. Or, their experience of having a gender is so faint or so far removed from their perception of gender that it's as if they have no gender at all. Unlike Eli, I have not experienced any sort of formal social transition, nor do I experience dysphoria, or seek to medically transition through surgery or hormone treatments like he has. I haven't changed my name, and I'm still okay with people using she, her pronouns for me, or any pronouns for that matter. Because of my physique, people tend to assume that I am a woman. And since I'll take any pronouns, I never feel the need to correct them. In these ways, I am lucky, but I often feel as though I am deceiving people by not being upfront about my gender. And I am wary to do so for fear that they may reveal themselves to be transphobic or bigoted against non binary people. It doesn't help that the pronouns I like the most are non traditional: they, them, stars, redacted in all caps with brackets. I rarely mention these, my xenopronouns, to even other queer people for fear of ridicule. Even Eli himself once expressed distaste for xenopronouns before he or I fully understood what they were. But in our friend group, in the egg cult, I have had a free space to experiment with identity, and there's been room for disagreement and respectful debate. At one point, I expressed my discomfort with referring to someone by its pronouns, and my friends rightly argued that if someone wants to be referred to by its, then that's not demeaning it, it's showing it respect in its identity. Discussion of transness is open in our friend group, and people aren't afraid to argue for what they believe in. The egg cult is a real smorgasbord of people. It's a mix of East Asian, Southeast Asian, South Asian, Latina, and Jewish Americans, with a couple token white people. Most of us are gay, trans, or both, and almost all of us are some form of neurodivergent. Overlaps in our identities and interests, like video games, brought us together, as well as attending the same high school, but our different backgrounds and perspectives have only served to bring us closer together. As demonstrated in a 2009 paper on ethnography in multi-ethnic youth spaces, drawing connections across cultural lines helps people connect on a deeper level. In the Egg Cult Discord server, Eli or his partner Miro might ask me or our Jewish friend Milo about Jewish practices and how traditions from their Catholic upbringing might compare. Through these inquiries, we learn more about each other's religious backgrounds and how they've shaped our perspectives. For example, Miro and Eli taught me about the concept of Catholic guilt, and Milo and I have taught them about the rules of repentance surrounding Yom Kippur. We've also shared language, cuisine, fashion, and more with each other. bonding over our differences as much as our similarities. Another reason why Eli feels as secure as he does in his gender identity is that he's a trans man, as opposed to a trans woman or non binary person. When I asked Eli about his thoughts on the trans community as a whole, he told me that there's this often unspoken difference in experience between trans masc people, or trans men, and trans femme people, or trans women.
I feel like it's like way easier to just kind of like forget about like my transness, I guess, and how it
Mm.
like affects my other aspects of my life because like I do think that like we pass way easier as like trans mask people. Like the
Right.
worst thing I have going for me is that I'm short. And like but I get to be a short king then, you know? Like
Mhm.
I feel like it's so much more common for like trans mask people to go stealth than it is for trans femme people. And maybe that's why they're always like the face of representation,
Right.
and why they catch most of like the 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 like arguments.
A 2017 study on college students' acceptance of trans peers found that students were more disapproving of masculine appearing trans women than they were of feminine appearing trans women and trans men, both feminine and masculine appearing. For a variety of reasons, some of which may include harsh scrutiny of women's appearance and aversion to feminine expression in male born people, trans women are far more often the focus in discussion of trans people than are trans men. This inequality in attention, especially from transphobic people, has allowed Eli to exist as a trans man in cisnormative spaces without much ostracization. In both interviews, Eli expressed concerns about how his conception of his own identity as a trans man might enforce and make him internalize sexist views on what it means to be a man or to be masculine.
I feel like so many like gender affirming things are rooted in traditional like ideas of gender expression.
Yeah.
And I don't really know how that if that's a good thing, if that's a bad thing, if that's like avoidable, if that's like unavoidable.
According to a 2021 study on trans people's perspectives on the subject, gender affirmation is an experience, both internal and external, of feeling secure and fulfilled in one's gender identity and expression. The external factor manifests in a sense of respect, of people seeing and appreciating a trans person for who they are. The internal factor, self affirmation, involves a trans person accepting themselves and their trans identity, a feeling that their gender identity and the real life manifestation thereof have aligned. That feeling of alignment can come from anywhere, such as engaging in certain activities that a transgender person might see as corresponding to their gender. Eli gave the example of building things, or wearing certain clothing, or otherwise acting or presenting in a way that they themselves think of as aligning with their gender identity. As Eli pointed out, these sources of affirmation are often rooted in traditional gender ideals. A trans man might feel affirmation repairing a car, while a trans woman might feel affirmation teaching herself to knit. However, the opposite could be true. Maybe another trans woman would feel affirmed in her self image as a cool girl who likes cars when she takes a look under the hood, and another trans man might feel affirmed as a sweet guy who makes cozies for his hot chocolate mugs. Self affirmation is just that, affirmation of the self. If a trans person is trying to force themselves to fulfill gender roles that do not align with who they are as a person, and that is not self affirmation. In fact, that would lead to gender dysphoria, a painful misalignment between the self and the ideal. If someone just so happens to have qualities that align with what is considered acceptable for someone of their gender identity, that doesn't mean that they agree with fixed gender roles as a rule, or that anyone else has to meet the harsh standards that they might hold for themselves. With the rise of anti trans rhetoric and legislation in the United States and all across the world, it is more important now than ever to support the trans people in your life any way you can. As Eli's account has shown, as I myself have experienced, showing trans people that you care, that you respect their identities and dignity as people, can make a world of difference. To parents, be patient. Ask questions. You might not understand what your child is feeling or going through, but expressing a desire to understand, and support however you can, will make the journey a lot easier for you both. To friends, classmates, coworkers, reach out. Check in. It's easy in times like these to forget there are people who care. And you don't have to like every trans person you meet. Some trans people suck, but don't misgender them. It's a low blow. Don't do it. To trans folks, stay strong. Do what you gotta do to survive. Keep the people who appreciate you for who you are close. And be kind to yourself. The current climate is unkind enough. Lastly, if you have any money to spare and want more ways to help trans folks, I've included the links to nonprofit organizations in the description above the references list. Stay safe out there.